Well, thanks everybody for coming today. We wanted to take the opportunity to introduce to the public and to the press the results of the deployment audit and the community policing analysis that we commissioned. I think we all agree that the top priority for any municipal government is to provide a safe community. And coming into office, I was fairly alarmed at the growth in violent crime in Anchorage, Alaska over the last 6 or 7 years. And I wanted to take steps to reverse that trend. We started with new leadership in the police department with the hiring of Chief Mew. And then I also wanted to get an independent review of the organizational structure and how we deploy our valuable public safety resources. So what we did is we put out an RFP for a qualified firm to conduct a deployment audit and to make recommendations on how we could increase our community policing efforts. Several organizations do this kind of analysis. The IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and of course the Police Executives Research Forum, or PERF. PERF was selected to conduct the work, and today we are releasing their final report. And it's important because when we look at our police department, which by the way I firmly believe we have an excellent police department, it's a $90 million operation. And we owe it to the citizens of Anchorage to make sure that when we're spending that kind of money, that we are indeed getting the best value that we can for $90 million. And the other key element is, you know, we're a city that's blessed with outstanding facilities, but if you don't feel safe going out and using those facilities, then we're not really giving you, the citizens, the value you deserve. So it's important that we do this kind of analysis. It's always good to get folks with a separate set of eyes to come in and take a look at how you're doing things. We did this in the mid-90s as well. There was an independent analysis of how we were organized, and I think it led to some very good suggestions that were implemented. So we are going to let the Chief and Dr. Fraser explain a little bit more about the details of the report, but there were a couple takeaways that I wanted to mention. First and foremost is that we have budget challenges. There's just no doubt about that, and it's going to be difficult for us over the next few years to look at an expansion of our police department. So with that recognition in mind, we want to implement strategies that we can do today, and there are some things in the report that indicate there's ways to expand our community policing efforts with the force that we have today. And then secondly, and I think Dr. Fraser will talk about this a little bit more, but the ratio of officers to your population really isn't a good indicator of what your staffing levels should be, because every city is different. We have different geography, different economics, certainly relationship to other cities and proximity, which of course we don't have too much of. So that really isn't the best indicator, and I think we'll speak to that a little bit later. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Mew, who then will comment on his takeaways from the report, and then he'll turn it over to Dr. Fraser. So, Chief?
Well, thank you very much. I hope I'm not covering up too many mics here. So it's been quite a project getting to where we are today. We started the RFP in the spring, and PERF was selected. There were a number of vendors that competed for this project, and we're pleased to have them with us, and I'm pleased to have this report. Their mission was to tell us what we can do in terms of how we can best deploy today based on what our current staffing is. And we gave them the mission of how should we deploy at where we thought our staffing would be at the end of this year. So there's been earlier talk about, you know, our numbers coming down. That's out of the equation. What they worked on is where our numbers are projected to be by the end of this year. So what can we do to best deploy with what we'll have at the close of this year, and how to best do community policing with that. The second part of the mission was to tell us how we could best deploy and how we could best deploy around community policing when we're through this slump and when we've grown back to the place we were 18 months ago. So that was their other part of their charge. And their final charge was to help us figure out sworn versus non-sworn, where should we have the right people in the right positions. So when we get back in a growth mode, we know the right number and kinds of people to hire on the non-sworn side to get the balance that we need. So that was their mission. My takeaways, the first one is that I think we've got a report here that tells the Anchorage Police Department that there are some additional community policing activities that we can undertake right now with what we've got. Okay, maybe not the whole enchilada of community policing, but there, as everybody knows, we do some community policing today. Okay, APD does some community policing. We can do more today with what we have today. And so that's my first big takeaway. And as you get through the report, you may have specific questions about it, but in general terms, it sets out north-south geographic focus. It gives us, we assign beat owners in patrol that are responsible for certain beats, beat managers who are their sergeants. There's some different ways we focus detectives on doing more with the community, looking at cases that are not being assigned these days, that we can get back in touch with those detectives, with those victims, and maybe make some more cases that way. There are some things we can do right now with what we've got. We'll use this report. We won't implement everything in this report like today. Okay, it's going to take us a while to implement these things, but it will be a guide for us. And I think we'll use this report. We'll take it back to the department. Our first order of business is going to be going through. There's some 50-some recommendations in here, studying which ones are no-brainers, which ones we can implement right away, which ones are going to require some work on our part to be able to implement. There may be some in here that you're not so sure we want to implement. We'll have those discussions with the mayor, but right now our first order of business will be figuring out how much of this we can implement, how fast we can do it. But then more than that, after we get through the budget challenges we've got and we start to grow again, we know where to put new positions when we get back into growth mode, and what to do with those positions and how to roll them into furthering community policing. It helps us figure out how to maximize unobligated patrol time, for instance, so that we can have more time on the street to do proactive work, trying to reduce the time we're slave to repeat calls for service. So that's what it does for us, I think, from a high level. There's many, many details in it, as you probably are already becoming aware. And I guess I'll stop there for right now, because I think you'll probably have questions, and I'll see what those questions are. Now I think I'll turn the podium over to Dr. Fraser, who is the Director of Management Services for the Police Executive Research Forum. Dr. Fraser has directed over 180 studies himself, about 50 of them on this particular topic, which is staffing and deployment. So he's worked at 4 different police departments and held positions at 4 different universities. So we're quite happy to have Dr. Fraser as the lead for this team. And I'd like to welcome him up now. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. Just a couple of quick things about my organization, the Police Executive Research Forum. We've been around 30 years. We're a private nonprofit headquartered in Washington, D.C., and our sole mission is to improve policing. We've done, as the Chief mentioned, probably over 200 different studies like this or of departments over the last 10 to 15 years. When we focus on staffing and deployment, it's a little bit different than some of the broader studies that we do. So one of the things that was important to us was to get an idea of how this department is set up, organized, staffed, and how people are deployed. We spent probably a total of about 4 person weeks on site. There were 4 different of us that were here. We spent lots of time looking at data and getting information from the police department. We looked at a number of other reports, a number of other sort of studies that the department has done internally. So we feel we got a very good grasp of how the department works, how it staffs, and how it puts its people in the right places at the right time. One of the things that's important is this is looking at workload. Our studies are workload based. The mayor said something that's important. There are lots of people that would like to use a shorthand, that is officers per population. We view that as of not much value because there's so much different. Just a quick example. 2 of the departments I worked in, one had 400 officers for 330,000 people and 27 square miles. Another one I worked in, we had 650 officers for 200,000 people and 72 square miles. The crime rate's about the same. It's all how people use departments. So anytime we're asked about ratios of population per or officers per population, we sort of say it really doesn't help you very much if you're trying to look at staffing. Which is critical is looking at workload. And the 2 key workload measures that we start with is looking at patrol, because that's the bulk of the force, and that's officers responding to calls for service, and investigations, that is looking at the investigation of crimes that are reported to an agency. Here, just to talk just for a minute, the agency or investigators here, their workload is not at the same level as other places around the country. So we see